Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. This is my third attempt at this. My audio keeps going horrifically wrong. Hopefully this one will hold up. Today we're talking about A Tempest of Tea by Hafsah Faizal. This came out on February the 20th of this year and is a YA fantasy novel. This is the third book set within this world. However, this is the start of a new series. I haven't read the previous two books. If you want to check them out before this, I will throw their titles above. As always, we shall talk about the story, the characters, the world building, as well as the presentation before my final thoughts at the end. Let's just jump straight in. The story centres around the Spindrift tea house, and when I say tea house, that is what it is during the day. It is a tea house for the rich and powerful to come to. However, at night it changes to something else. It changes to a blood bar. Now, the two proprietors of the Spindrift, Artie and Jin, are well-known criminals at this point. Both either immigrants or children of immigrants, and they've taken a lot of disadvantaged or immigrant or young vampire children under their wing to help keep them safe and give them a safe place. So during the day, this tea house caters to the rich and powerful who come in and they speak freely, safe in the knowledge that nobody around them will understand what they're saying because of casual racism. At night, however, it also becomes something else. It becomes an illegal blood bar for the lower class vampires of society who are not really cared for by their own people. And this has got the attention of the Ram, the Lord of the City, who has been making several moves to basically try and catch them doing their illicit activities and so far failed. So has gone one step further and gone straight to the landlord and threatened their family. And as a result, in 2 weeks' time, Spindrift will be lost to Artie and Jin altogether. However, a captain of the Ram's Guard comes forward and informs them that a special manuscript has been stolen from the Ram, which may have some incriminating in there. Obviously, this guard has some ulterior motives, and if they manage to steal it back and return it, then it might give them a bit of a stay of execution on no guarantee long term. And you then have the Heist story of them getting a team together, breaking into a nearly impossible to break into place. In this case, it's Tearoom, the home of the vampires, and getting out with the goods, and then the fallout from that. The first half of the book is a bit slow as it does the setup, but once it gets to part 2, it does pick up pace, and this is a solid and tenseful Heist story. Very reminiscent in many ways of Six of Crows, and I'll talk about that final thoughts at the end. In terms of characters then, and you have the motley crew that you would kind of expect. Arguably the main character is Artie, who is on the front cover of the book. He is an immigrant who was washed up on the shores in a boat filled with blood several years previously and was taken in by a mysterious benefactor, but then ran away after a year and is driven by vengeance, hatred of the colonial nation that she now finds herself in. More on that and will later. Over the course of the last decade or so, she's built up a reputation for being incredibly smart and incredibly ruthless. She has a reputation where all she has to do is tell people they are going to go do stuff, and there's a level of fear of her that this generally works. This does paint a target on her back. It means she's really hated by a lot of the other gangs, as well as the authorities for her illicit activities as well. The flip side of the coin there is you have Jin. So, whereas Artie is an immigrant straight off, Jin is the child of immigrant scientists who'd been working on something. We don't know what it is at the start of the book. However, returning from school one day, he finds the family home burning to the ground, runs inside to try and find his family, gets trapped, and it's Artie that actually saves him. That was around 10 years ago at this point. Fast forward to now, and these two are like brother and sister. It is worth noting that Jin is very much the yin to Artie's yang, whereas Artie is very much the weapon and the threat. Jin is the silver tongue, the good-looking, charismatic, can talk their way into and out of anything, who has, as described in the book, fingers more adhesive than most, a bit of a thief. The third character worth mentioning is a romance character and the third point of view character of the book as well, and that is Flick. Flick and Jin have worked together previously, and there is a little bit of sexual tension going on here that is quite well done. It's more wholesome than the other romance we'll talk about in it. Flick is the daughter of one of the most powerful merchant women in the city. However, she has a heart of gold, largely because she's been brought up more by the servants than her own mother. And one day she saw one of the servants basically needing to go to a doctor, and the housekeeper sign off the day off. So she forged a letter to allow them to go to the doctor. Over time, more and more people came forward to her, and eventually she ended up trying to forge, or successfully forging, I should say, a signet ring of a major merchant. Obviously, this is a case that signet rings are used as a stamp of approval and authority. He got caught, despite the work being exceptional, and has basically been on house arrest ever since. And you have the breakout of them from the house and then falling back in with Artie and Jin for this heist. The other character worth mentioning here is the Ram, who is the major political power in the city. Nobody knows who they are. The ruler of the city is basically referred to by the mask that hides their identity. And whilst they're not on the page very much physically, they do appear as a background threat throughout the whole course of the story. And the revelation at the end for who this character is really well done. Mentioned as well romantic interest. The captain of the guard that comes forward with the information, who's called Leaf, is another immigrant from a faraway land. Basically, they are a Hashashin or an assassin, and they have their own ulterior motives for working with Artie and Jin as well, and wanting hold of this document. And there is an interesting mirror aspect between them and Artie, more specifically in terms of the fact that they're very, very similar sorts of characters, and there is an almost lustful attraction between the two, even though neither trusts the other. And that goes exactly as well as you would expect it to do. And whilst they are very similar, and initially at least what they need to do is aligned, there is a set of this person has their own targets and things that they want to achieve and their own reasons. Finally, you have Matteo Andoni, who is the last member of the crew to be recruited, and they are very much the maverick artiste of the city. There's some revelations about who and what he is from. I'm not going to spoil that here, but they're very attractive, very suggestive, very languid kind of person who has an interesting sort of back and forth with Artie in particular, and you do get the impression that maybe there's a bit of tension there. There are a number of other characters that pop up throughout this, but I'm not going to talk too much about them. Generally speaking, they're there as obstacles for the crew to overcome. Generally speaking, they're quite well done. I really do like the sort of interplay between Artie and Jin and Flick in particular. And overall, it's pretty solidly done. There are, again, however, a lot of very big similarities between this Feast of Crows, and you're going to hear that quite a bit. The world building for this is good, but it suffers simply because of other books that I have recently read. So, in terms of the basic world building, this is fantasy London set in the late 19th, early 20th century, within fantasy Great Britain during the colonial era, or a tenure as it is called here, and the city is called White Roaring. And you don't get much of a sense beyond some illustration within the book of what the city looks like, beyond the fact it has a river and that the spindrift sort of bridges the gap between the rich and the poor by where it's located, and they have a dock system, but you don't really get a sense of the grit and the dirt and the atmosphere of the city itself, unfortunately. What this book does do, though, it has a commentary running all the way through it to do with colonialism and the effects of colonialism, first of all, on the countries that are invaded. Very much it describes the city of White Roaring almost like a vampire feeding on the blood of other countries, which is a very apt analogy when you really think about it, because colonization, as a rule of thumb, went invasion, a massacre, and then exploitation. And that is exactly what happened here, and that links very closely into Artie's backstory specifically as well. What I will say, however, is that whilst this does a good job of telling about the issues of immigrants within a racist society, it does not do a great job of showing it. There are a few moments in here. The one that really does stand out is early on, where they're talking about the tea house and the rich and the powerful, assuming the people working there can't understand what's being said, so they spill their secrets more easily. That's a casual level of racism, which should absolutely never happen, and is actually well portrayed in here. But you don't get a sense of a great deal of struggle for Artie, for example. At this point in Artie's life, they are a notorious criminal, so they're going to be distrusted by the rich and the powerful within this very white-dominated city. That's not necessarily going to be down to the fact that they are from another country and they have a different colour skin. It's because they are a clear threat. And in a way, that's a shame that it doesn't do more to drive that home. And whilst the theme does run all the way through and it does bring up some interesting questions, the fact that it's tell and don't show does kind of hamstring it a little bit. The other thing that's mentioned here is to do with aristocracy and the imbalance of power from the rich to the poor. This is more clearly done with the vampires going missing, but they're all poor vampires, so the vampires just don't care. And you have the place called the Aetherium, where the rich vampires sort of reside and party. And they just don't care about the half vampires or the struggling vampires, the ones that are not members of wealth. They care so much about image. And you also get a little bit of that with the human population as well. So overall, the world building is decent. The issue, again, as mentioned, is that I've read other books recently that have done it better, and it doesn't quite follow through on some of the themes that it's actually looking at with its world building, unfortunately. I want to talk about presentation now. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the art to begin with, as you have the cover and you have some art within the book. So I am really bad at names, so hopefully I'll pronounce these right. But you have Valentina Remena, who did the cover, and Virginia Allen for the map within, and I presume some of the other artwork within as well. So first of all, the cover is an absolute beauty, as you can clearly see. I love the fact that it sort of fills around to the outside with the smoke effect as well. And it's just a very pretty cover. The little cup of blood in a teacup, I also really do appreciate, with it being a vampire story as well. Also, I don't mention stuff like this very often, but the inside has a wonderful gradient rather than the normal boring white, which I love a good gradient. I'm a simple man. But you do have some artworks in here as well, and we do love a good fantasy map, and this has a gorgeous fantasy map, and this does more to give you an idea of what the city of White Roaring looks like, and you can clearly see the inspirations from the city of London with very much the Tower of Westminster-like structure there and the river cutting through the centre. But that isn't the only bit of artwork in here. The book is split into 3 sections: the setup, the heist, and the fallout, basically. And between each of those sections, you have this map, and this is a version of the map that they actually use within the story to find their way through the Aetherium, which I really do appreciate. Now, in terms of actual writing style, it's very economic in the way it's written. It does get the plot moving at a decent pace. It takes a little bit of time to get the setup. Part 1 is bigger than parts 2 and 3. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, part 3 is the shortest of the group, as it's dealing with the fallout. But it does a good job of dealing with tension and using failure as a means to drive the tension within the story. And you do have the ever-looming threat of the ram in the background. And I like the fact that the biggest threat for this is one that you never actually see until right at the end. There are a number of flashbacks within here. Sometimes it's a bit unclear that they are flashbacks, which is a shame, but they do a good job of building up the characters, especially for Artie in particular. And there's some very, very good foreshadowing in there for some reveals later on. So overall, I think this is a very well written book. I love the artwork. I do love it when there's a good map. This is a really good map. So overall, I think this is an amazingly well presented novel. Final thoughts. This is decent. I think this suffers from when I've read it a little bit because this is my third fantasy heist story set within a late 19th, early 20th century setting in quick succession. And there's a lot of similarities between this and Six of Crows. Now, if you've read Six of Crows a while ago, I would absolutely suggest you pick this up. It's very reminiscent of that in many regards. If you've read it recently, however, maybe leave it a little bit because whilst there's a lot of similarities here, Six of Crows does a lot of things better, which is a shame, really. This has good world building, good characters, and good character dynamics, but on a one-to-one basis, for example, when you compare Artie and Casbrecker from that book, Artie loses hands down, not because they're bad, but because the writing in Six of Crows is exceptional at building the characters and setting the world as well, giving you a world a lived-in feel, which this kind of loses a little bit. Also, the themes of colonialization I would have preferred to have been more upfront and central and more show don't tell in this. Part of that is because I've just read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which also talks about colonization and the long-term effects of that on the populations from those countries. Now, there is a difference there as that's looking after the fact, whereas this is set during, but that pulls its punches far less than it feels like this. But this is a good fancy heist story with some engaging characters set in a world that is quite interesting. It's probably worth reading the other two books that are set in the same world before this, just to get a better sense of world building and the political situation sort of globally. But overall, I gave this a 3.75 stars out of 5 over on Storygraph. What I'd like to know is what new releases are you looking forward to this year? Let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you all soon.